Hello, in this video I'm going to discuss the relationship between quantification and negation. So here we have a couple of different combinations of quantification and negation. We have for each value of x not fx, it's not the case that some value of x fx, it's not the case that for all values of x fx, and some value of x is such that not fx. So let's think about what these different things mean. So the top left says that each thing isn't f. So each thing isn't a frog. And the top right says nothing. It says, is there something that is a frog? No. So it says nothing is a frog. These are equivalent. If everything is not a frog, then are there any frogs? No, nothing is a frog. And if nothing is a frog, then each thing isn't a frog. So those are equivalent. The bottom, we have not for all x fx, and this is, it's not the case that everything is f. And the bottom right says something isn't f. And these also are equivalent. The thing that's tricky here to really sort of pay attention to is the negation of the universal. The negation of the universal doesn't say that. So remember, when is the universal true? It's true only if everything is a frog. And when we negate it, we deny it. We say that thing not true. So we're saying we're in a situation, and we take the for all x fx. What we're saying is we're in a situation where the universal quantification is false. And there are lots of ways for the universal quantification to be false. As long as at least one thing is not f, then the universal quantification is false. So we're not saying, as opposed to saying each thing has this property of being an un-f. So that's a universal quantification, and it denies of each thing that it has a property. So if you, it denies that it has that you have the property in question, and I don't have the property in question, and you know, this doesn't have the property in question, and so on. The universal, whereas the negation of the universal says, can you truly ascribe the property frog to everything? No, you can't ascribe it to everything, but maybe you can ascribe it to some things. Okay, so the bottom two are equivalent. If we say it's not the case that everything is f, then there's at least one thing that isn't. And if there's at least one thing that isn't, then we say, is everything f? No. So these two are also equivalent. The top row implies the bottom row, but not vice versa. If everything isn't a frog, then it's not the case that everything is a frog. But if we say it's not the case that everything is a frog, does that mean each thing isn't a frog? No, it doesn't. That's a stronger claim, right? We can say either everything is a frog. We can say, oh, that's not true. Then there's all this space where there are all sorts of things that maybe are frogs and aren't frogs. And then there's all the way over at this end, the situation where there are no frogs, where each thing is an unfrog. And the top one says each thing is an unfrog, whereas the bottom one just says, is everything a frog? No, not everything is a frog. And the same thing over here. If we say, is there something that's a frog? No. Then there's at least one thing that is an unfrog. That's fine, so the top implies the bottom. But if we say something is an unfrog, does that imply there are no frogs? No. I'm an unfrog, but there are also frogs. So the bottom doesn't imply the top. And since the top row implies the bottom, so the top left implies the bottom left, and the top right implies the bottom right, but the bottoms are equivalent. The top right also implies the bottom left, and the bottom left implies the top right. The top row are the sentences on the top row are two ways of saying the same thing. The sentences on the bottom row are two ways of saying the same thing. And that thing, the top thing implies the bottom thing, but not vice versa. So let's consider then a more complicated sentence like no ostrich is honorable. So we know how to symbolize something. If we wanted to say something is not f, we could say some x not fx. We just saw that. And if we wanted to symbolize nothing is f, that's not some x fx. So what about no ostrich is honorable? Well, the thing is, in those sentences, the previous sentences, we didn't have a determinative phrase and a predicate. We have the something. But you can think of something as a determinative phrase and nothing as a determinative phrase. It's something and no thing, and so the determiner or quantity word is some or no, and the restrictor, the noun phrase in there, is the thing. But it's a dummy restrictor. It doesn't do any work in characterizing which group you're attributing the property to. So in those sentences, we didn't have a determiner phrase and a predicate, but in this we do. We have a more complicated sentence because we have the no ostrich part, which is a determiner phrase. The quantity word in this case is no, and the noun phrase is ostrich. So no plus ostrich gives us a determiner phrase or quantifier phrase, and then that thing hooks on to the verb phrase is honorable. So here's a way of reading no ostrich as honorable. Is there an honorable ostrich? Answer, no. Well, how would you symbolize there is an honorable ostrich? Or, well, another way of saying that is some ostrich is honorable. So some x, OX, and HX? No, we're saying that's not true. In other words, we're saying not some x, OX, and HX. So this is a good way to symbolize no ostrich is honorable. Now, it's not the only way to symbolize it. We could say each ostrich isn't honorable, or each ostrich is dishonorable. And then we'd be saying for each thing, remember, so it's in each, we can use our determiner phrase, verb phrase to think about, method to think about this. We have each ostrich, that's our determiner phrase. Isn't honorable is our verb phrase. Ostrich, so each gives us a universal and a conditional. And then the noun phrase from the determiner phrase is symbolized in the antecedent. So we symbolize ostrich, and that in the antecedent, so we symbolize OX. The verb phrase is isn't honorable, and so that's going to be symbolized in the consequent. So we're going to symbolize isn't honorable, and that's not HX. No ostrich is honorable. We can actually also think of this in terms of the determiner phrase, verb phrase method. The no gives us a negation and an existential and a conjunction. Ostrich goes in one conjunct. Honorable goes in the other conjunct. These two sentences now, though, are equivalent, so they're two different ways of saying the same thing. If each ostrich isn't suppose that each and every ostrich is dishonorable, then is there an honorable? Are there any honorable ostriches? Is there some ostriches that is honorable? No, no ostrich is honorable, and vice versa. So those are equivalent. We could also say, is every ostrich honorable? No. It's not the case that every ostrich is honorable, and so that would be not for all x if OX and HX. And we could also say some ostrich is dishonorable, so that's some ostrich is our determiner phrase, isn't honorable is our verb phrase, so some gives us an existential and a conjunction. Ostrich being the noun phrase from the determiner phrase will be one conjunct, and isn't honorable will be the other, so we'll have some x, OX, and not HX. And again, these two are equivalent, and the bottom row, or excuse me, the top row implies the bottom row there. So there are two ways to symbolize no ostrich is honorable. We could say, or here's a different way. If you find an ostrich, it's not honorable. That's what we saw in the upper left-hand side of the previous slide. So you could symbolize no ostrich is honorable as for all x if OX then not HX. And you'll see the text discuss both. So we really have two ways of thinking about it. Is there a dishonorable ostrich? No. Oh, that's okay, now here we have a more complicated sentence. We have no ostrich is dishonorable. So we could think of that as saying, is there a dishonorable ostrich? No. So we have the negate, we're going to symbolize the negation of some ostrich is dishonorable. So we're going to have not existential conjunction, and we're going to have OX on one side to symbolize ostrich, and we're going to have is dishonorable on the other side to symbolize it. Oh boy. So what about no ostrich is dishonorable? Well, so we could think of that as saying, is there a dishonorable ostrich? Answer, no. So negation of there is a dishonorable ostrich. And what would it mean to say there is a dishonorable ostrich? Well, some ostrich is dishonorable. So some gives us existential and conjunction. The noun phrase in the determiner phrase is ostrich, so one of our conjuncts will be OX. Our other conjunct will be is dishonorable, so not HX. So is there some x such that it's an OX and it's a non-HX? Is there a thing that is an ostrich and dishonorable? No. So no x, not some x, OX, and not HX. Or you could symbolize it this way. If you find an ostrich, it is not dishonorable. So for each x, if OX, then not HX. Now, so here, if we have this symbolization of no ostrich is dishonorable, the no gives us the negation in front of the existential, and the dishonorable, the dis, gives us the negation on the HX. So we have the negation from the determiner phrase, the negation from the quantity word, goes at the beginning with the existential and the conjunction, and the negation in the verb phrase, the dis in dishonorable, goes on one of the conjuncts. And so the two negations get their separate places, and they're associated with their what's happening in those different places. So the dis from dishonorable, that negation goes where we work on verb phrases, and the no from no ostrich goes on the part of the sentence that corresponds to the determiner phrase. Now, if we say no ostrich is dishonorable, then we have to put two negations on the HX. One of them comes from the dis, and the other comes from the no. I think that's a little bit confusing, because the no, we put in the universal and the conditional, but then we also have to remember to stick in the negation at the end, but then we have this second negation coming from the verb phrase. And this sentence is, as far as its equivalence goes, perfectly fine, but I find it confusing. I like this one better because it places the two negations in the English sentence on different parts of the logical symbolization. And so I prefer this as a symbolization of no F is G.